Guys, it is game one tonight, 7 p.m. on Peacock. Game one, Eastern Conference semifinals. The Detroit Pistons, the Cleveland Cavaliers. You have the head coach of the Pistons, who used to be the head coach of the Cavs. You have the interlocking matchups that we've seen 100 times before between these two teams. But let's start with the biggest thing that we have to figure out, and that is, how can the Cavs get Donovan Mitchell back to being the superstar they need him to be in order to go on a deep playoff run? Jason, when you look at this particular matchup against Detroit, you look at what Donovan Mitchell has done against this Detroit defense in the past and how he played against Toronto. I want to ask this question, then we'll dive into it more specifically as we go along. Can the Cavs beat the Pistons in this series in totality if Donovan Mitchell doesn't get back to being the Donovan Mitchell he needs to be and we've been accustomed to seeing during his tenure in Cleveland?
No, he has to be. There's like a line that you're walking, right? Because he had a 50-point playoff game and they lost. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily you don't want exorbitant usage rates and all that, but you've got to get Donovan back to being Donovan, and he just didn't look like himself in that series. There was a lot of talk about, was he hurt? Is there something going on with him physically? I think Mike's done a great job of sort of explaining some of the defensive pressures that he saw against Toronto and how unique it was, and I'm sure Detroit was taking notes on that. Detroit is a lot like Toronto. They're a better version of Toronto in terms of defensive presence, in terms of physicality, not really a three-point shooting team. It's why we said at the start of the playoffs, this is actually a perfect path for the Cavs to get to the conference finals, because the two teams they're playing take the least amount of threes of any team in the East. But you know, if you can, the beauty is, or the ideal is, to get the Evan that you got for most of that series, not all of it. He had a couple bad games in Toronto, but for most of the series, with the Jarrett that you saw in the second half, particularly the third quarter of Game 7, if you can marry that with Donovan and James cutting back on some of the turnovers a little bit, you know, now you're onto something. But this team, you know, I said last year, this team will go as far as Evan can take them. We've seen how far a Donovan-led team can take them, and I still believe that's true, that a Donovan-led team can only get them to the second round. But Donovan was not Donovan. You at least need Donovan to be Donovan, you know. So, and then the hope is that the other guys come alongside and that Evan continues to flourish the way that we saw in the first series. But if Donovan slips off, no, I don't think that's going to work for them in this series. I think Donovan has to get back. He's really made an emphasis on attacking the rim, and he's got to finish at the rim, and he's got to make open threes.
Yeah, Zach, your thoughts on just, you have those two guys, but Donovan Mitchell, he's giving you 30 traditionally in the playoffs. And I haven't, I told you, Jason, I said, I haven't seen Donovan play that way in a playoff series in a long time, if I could think of.
Yeah, no, in a general sense, right, this is the stage you wanted. So the guy that's your leader, who's Donovan Mitchell, and he's not going to do it alone, but this is what you want. So, look, it was tough. He was not the same, and those questions about is he healthy, what's going on, were valid. But I think in the last two games, he still shot it. They didn't go in as much as they usually do. He was getting to the rim. He was shooting the floater. He was trying to create. So it doesn't need to be a 50-point game, but I think there's one there. And I think if we look and say the Cavs in 6, Cavs in 7, which I think we're all thinking, and we'll get to that, I think we are going to see a much better version of Donovan Mitchell than we saw in the first-round series.
Yeah, Jason just said something about getting to the rim. And for me, I thought that he did a little bit better job of doing that in the Game 7. But, for me, it was strange to see not only James Harden but Donovan Mitchell not be able to get all the way to the basket. And they made them, really shoot floaters and really, cut the basket off. Also, they did a good job of taking charges when they were getting in the paint. And I think, McNuggets, we talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you got James Harden, you got him, you got Donovan Mitchell, and each of those guys have the ability to get you 30. I don't know if I'm changing this in my mind. I look at James Harden's game, and I think he's still tremendous. He's still dynamic. He can still pass the ball. His step back is there. But I think he's lost a half a step where he's not able to just strictly blow by you. When James Harden was in his peak, he not only could blow by you off one or two dribbles, he also was very shifty. He could hit the step back. He could get to the free throw line. And he used to get to the line because, you had to respect the first dribble. I think he's a half a step slow in the first dribble. And now that gives teams a little bit bigger, more of an opportunity to guard him. So when I look at him getting to the rack, he's looking to be more of a facilitator than a scorer, which leaves Donovan Mitchell in the position that he has to be able to solidify and be an attacker and be able to finish at the rack.
One of the things that I think the Toronto series exposed with Harden a little bit, and I mean, I think this is probably the case before that, it just became a little bit more noticeable, is he's not a guy who likes to be pressured.
Yeah.
You can sort of get into him a little bit and create some of those turnovers. Toronto did a great job of picking guys up at half court, even before half court, and for both Donovan and James, but James especially, I just don't think that he handled a lot of the pressure well, and I would imagine you're going to see more of that against Detroit.
Yeah, I think we're going to find things out, not just tonight, but Thursday and Saturday, the little things and how each team is going to attack in this series, right? But I think one thing we're sure of that's going to carry over is Toronto just sat guys in the paint.
Yeah,
right. We're going to keep you out of the paint, and that's going to carry over. So James,
and Detroit's bigger.
James has to cut down on the turnovers, no doubt.
Yeah,
but Donovan has to be really good, which he has been traditionally in picking his spots of when can I go attack and either shoot the floater or kick it out, and when do we need to respect, hey, they're not letting us in the paint, so what do we do otherwise?
When it comes to Donovan Mitchell and James Harden against this Detroit matchup, what Toronto did in round one to both those guys was kind of unprecedented in terms of how they switched, where they were sending help from, how they guarded those two. Detroit, I'm sure, sees that and wants to incorporate part of that into what they do. But J.B. Bickerstaff's run the exact same defense ever since he became the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2020, and he runs the exact same defensive principles that he ran in Cleveland with Detroit now. For them to completely switch up what they've done over the last 2 years in Detroit, over the last 6 years of JB's career, seems pretty far-fetched on a one-day turnaround. I think the best way for the Cavs to continue to attack this Pistons defense, if they're going to utilize some of the things that Toronto did, especially the top block, is use those two as screeners. And we saw in Game 7, it was the one adjustment you could look at and say, either Kenny was saving this for the last moment possible, or this just happened to come out based off how Toronto was guarding them. They used James and Donovan in inverted pick and rolls with Evan Mobley, and that allowed Evan to get downhill, led to 3 of his 5 buckets in the game. If they're going to take those two out by denying them high early and making their lives miserable catching the ball, use them as screeners. Because if you're top blocking and you're being used as a screener, that's creating 3 guys to get around as opposed to 2, making it easier for the big, in this case Evan Mobley, to get ahead of steam going downhill. But the defensive numbers favor Detroit in this matchup. I don't think Detroit can play better defense than Toronto did. And that's giving Toronto more credit than anything against Detroit. I just don't think it's better to play. It's not easy or maybe even possible to play better defense over the course of 7 games than we just saw from Toronto in round 1.
I actually think we talk a lot about what Detroit is going to do to stop the Cavs on defense. I'd be interested to see. I think this series actually comes down to what do the Cavs do on defense versus what Detroit is going to offensively bring to the table. Yeah. Cade Cunningham in the closeout game, I think he had 34. Didn't he average 30-something?
He averaged over 30 for the series.
He averaged over 30 for the series. That's their one guy they had. You look in that closeout game, Tobias Harris had 30. Tobias Harris is going to get 30. You're in trouble. So,
yeah, right.
But what do you guys think the defensive mentality is, and what do you think Kenny brings out of his bag in terms of how do you stop Cade Cunningham? Are they going to be willing to let him get his 40 and clamp down on other people? How do you think that they'll go about, defending Cade Cunningham in an offense that pretty much is him, Duren, Tobias Harris, and some other guys?
Yeah, Duren was not good at all in the first round. I would expect him to be better. Mike, do you think they would use Dean on Cade?
I'd be shocked if they didn't. And the numbers of Dean guarding Cade over the last 3 years have been terrific. And, I know he's not your guy, and if Bull was here, Bull would say, but he's a squid, he sucks. Dean is a flawed player who has the size and the strength to match up with a Cade Cunningham or a Scotty Barnes or a Brandon Ingram in a way that the Cavs don't have elsewhere. And I think if you're looking at these particular matchups, if I was Kenny Atkinson, I'd have Allen on Duren, I'd have Mobley on Asar Thompson, and basically just being a roaming helper because you don't have to guard Asar whatsoever outside of 3 feet from the bucket. Yeah. I'd have Dean on Cade, I'd have Harden on Tobias, and if Tobias wants to try and post up Harden 15 times a game, so be it. I think that actually matchup, it favors Tobias a little bit, but Harden's a much better post defender than he gets credit for. And I have Donovan, Chase, Duncan Robinson around. And just let that be the case. Say, Don, you have no help responsibilities. Duncan's their only three-point shooter. And that puts Mobley in his best defensive position, which is the free safety roamer to clean up anything that gets going towards the rim. So that's how I would defend Toronto if I was Kenny Atkinson.
What do you think, Mike? Do you think we might see Harden on Thompson a little bit, just because that's the guy you want to shoot?
Yeah, they're going to leave him wide open.
Yeah.
So I think I'd rather have Mobley in that instance, being able to help and roam and junk up the other stuff, than have Harden in that position. But I think Harden, A, did a better job against Toronto defensively than his historical reputation may precede him. And two, he's good in the post because he's so strong. And you saw Barnes, and you saw more Ingram than Barnes, but like Ingram would try to move him. Harden just stands there with his arm in his back and says, if you want to shoot over me, fine. If the Pistons want to live with 12 Tobias Harris mid-range jump shots, the Cavs are going to say, thank you very much.
Yeah. Who's the second guy on Cade then? Is it Strus?
Strus or Tyson, probably.
Yeah, right.
One
I think Tyson's going to play a lot more in this series. And I mean, he played a lot in Game 6 and 7.
I like that. I think, to me, you take a look at Dean Wade. Now, look, this is a 7-game series. Everybody get cursed out every other game.
Sure.
So hey, we minute to minute. If you hit a 3, we happy. If they scoring you too many times in a row, you got to come out. That's the thing that where we at today. Because look, I mean, you're in a 7-game series against Detroit. Like, the matchups are going to dictate it, and the thing that you have to realize is these games will be wildly different from game to game. Today, you might come out and you may play well. You may hit shots. They may not hit any shots, and you may win going away. Or they may come in, be more physical. You can't hit any shots, and it looks really bad on the road. So every game is his own individual season, and it's just about making sure that whatever they did to you last game, you try to come back and have an answer for it. And for me, we did a lot of prognosticating, like, okay, well, this is what it might. Listen, the Cavs, they should feel pretty good about themselves. They really particularly did not get a good effort or good playoff series from all of their core 4 guys. One day it was Evan Mobley, Jared Allen played well. A couple of first games it was Harden, and then Mitchell played well in the first few games. But other than that, they didn't put it all together. They were out physical and a lot of different other things, McNuggets.
One last number, then we got to hit the break. In 72 possessions in the last 3 seasons of NBA.com tracking data between Dean Wade and Cade Cunningham, Dean's guarded Cade 72 different possessions as the primary defender. In those possessions, Cade's shooting as a true shooting percentage of 37.3%. Over that same time span for his entire, I guess what you want to call all their matchups, he's 68.3. So almost 30% worse in the true shooting percentage in those 72 possessions guarded by Dean Wade. So they're going to have Dean for sure. I would assume, actually. I can't say for sure. On Cade early and often in this series.
Well, there you go. The Vanilla Wolf is the X factor. He will be on Cade Cunningham. Let's see if he can get it done.